So before I start off the video, I would just like to say that I think the Chinese tech industry will forever have a very special place in my heart. So I think for many fellow Chinese tech backholders, for those of you who have been in this industry for more than a year now, I think you would understand what I mean. It has been an extremely heart-wrenching journey. I've entered back in the late of 2020, and then I've been back holding for close to two odd years now. So I think back then in 2021 and 2022, to many of these Chinese tech names, no news equals to good news because we don't want to know what kind of new regulations they have provided or what kind of new extraordinary measures they have instituted for many of these tech companies. And every time the hammer dropped, the share price will tank alongside. But I think after transiting towards this entire current recovery, based off or right after the Chinese Party Congress back in October of 2022, every single news that came out thereafter was good news. So everybody was looking forward to the end of the crackdown, how China is going to stimulate the economy, what would the game plan moving forward be, and many of these positive sentiments started getting stirred in this entire industry, which is why we have seen many of these stocks, even mega cap stocks like Alibaba and Tencent, from their lows, they're probably up closer to 60 to 80% now, which also leaves me wondering, how long can this positive momentum go? And truth be told, I'm not a trader, I don't know, but I think at the end of the day, there will be a stop to many of these regulations, to many of these crackdowns, and the government has to provide some sort of clarity moving forward, especially for international investors that has been extremely jittery, and especially for those who have stayed at the sidelines for many months now. So I think just to put a full stop to this entire argument of how the Chinese government will want to regulate all these tech companies until they die, or because the Chinese government wishes to consolidate power, it does seem like we are much closer to the end of the tunnel. And of course, the only thing you need to be close to is the like button. So just move your mouse now to the bottom of the video, find the like button and smash on it. So just a few days ago on Friday, it's actually reported that both in Alibaba and Tencent's sub-business, the Chinese government is going to take a controlling share, or in this case, quote-unquote golden shares. And I'll explain a little bit more in the later part of this video. At first, when I saw this headline, the instant thought that popped up in my head was this meme, first time. I think it's quite hilarious because we have already been through so much that even such a headline doesn't faze us anymore. Because as we all know, the system in the US compared to China, they run on fundamentally different assumptions. And having the government taking a controlling stake, or in this case having golden shares, would not surprise or would not faze any of these long-term Chinese shareholders. Because it's kind of implicit that any businesses in China would somehow be controlled by the Chinese government. So an arm of the Cyberspace Administration of China took 1% of an Alibaba digital media subsidiary in Guangzhou on Jan 4th, according to a corporate database. So the company's media portfolio include businesses such as the streaming platform Youku and mobile browser UCWeb. And in this case, you might ask, what does this 1% stake even mean? So essentially, this 1% stake acts like a form of golden share. So a golden share that in theory allows Beijing to nominate directors or sway and veto important company decisions. So TikTok owner ByteDance and Weibo are among the major internet firms to have disclosed that sort of arrangement. And just so you know, Alibaba actually owns a significant amount of stake in Weibo as well. And Weibo, for international viewers, it's something like the Twitter of China. And I think Alibaba owns around 20% stake in Weibo, the last I remembered. So before we actually try to understand why the Chinese government is even remotely interested in having this 1% stake, we have to first understand what is the role of a media company in China. Specifically in the US, because freedom of speech has been one of the top priorities for many of its citizens, you can see that under such an arrangement, specifically in the West, so you have the Democrats' voice versus the Republican voice. However, in China, most, if not all, of the media sources are controlled by the government, because if you control the narrative, you control the population. So with this golden share arrangement, all of the media companies in China will be controlled by the Chinese government. So I'm not here to debate whether this is a good or bad policy. It's up for the country to decide, but I'm here to say that it's actually not something new. It's not a special arrangement targeted to Alibaba or Tencent only. It's an arrangement for every single media company out there. So with that being said, I think the headline might be a little bit misleading because at first thought, people might think that, hey, Beijing, or in this case, the Chinese government, is taking golden shares in Alibaba or Tencent, the entire conglomerate itself. But if you have to click in and read the article specifically based on the report, it's actually golden shares in a few of these media companies. And to be very honest, it's not something surprising. Now, signs are also growing that President Xi's administration, keen to revive the world's number 2 economy, is reversing course on campaigns against gaming addiction and preparing to unfeather firms such as Alibaba that drew government scrutiny. So to Mr. Lam, the two have been struggling with issues of crackdown in recent years. For both Alibaba and Tencent, the government stake could potentially help them to get the green light to do business in new areas and lower the risk of further clampdown by the regulators. Personally, I actually disagree. I disagree with Mr. Lam's conclusion. I think that the direction is clear, that crackdowns is starting to slow down. What I disagree is that the government stake could potentially help them. Because evidently, a 1% share is not gonna incentivize the government. So I think if the company were to screw something up, I think a 1% stake is not gonna provide much hesitation to the government. However, I'm still of the opinion that the government is not out here to kill any enterprise. They're providing so much jobs, so much prosperity. Why are they killing their golden goose? This has been an argument that I've never understood for the last 2 years. Even until today, many bears are still using the same argument. I think at the end of the day, it's a symbiotic relationship. So I think after this report was released, Tencent actually dipped more than 2%, while Alibaba was down as much as 1.6% in the Hong Kong market. But if you were to really look at how the companies have performed, if I were to pull out the chart of Alibaba, you can see that this is the Friday candle. I think the lowest it went was around 108, but then it closed at 112. So initially, I think the market was basically, I don't know, was it algo trading or was it people misinterpreting the news, saying that, Alibaba and Tencent will have these sort of golden share arrangement, and people just suddenly woke up to their senses and think that, hey, it's not the first time, it's nothing new, and it's just a media outlet, so people start bidding back up the price again. So similarly, I think for Tencent, it's a similar trend. If I pull out Tencent's chart here, you can see that in intraday, I think the lowest it went was around 356 and then it closed at 371. It opened at 364. So it's a similar course of action. People saw the news, it started trading downwards, I think negative 2%, like what the article suggested. And then people say that, hey, it's a nothing burger, and it started bidding up again. So to further bring home the point on this ending of the crackdown, there was also this article saying that Ant Group's revamp was basically completed. And this was not some pundit or some political expert on the site saying it. It was essentially said by a central bank official. So if it's the government official and if it's someone of authority, all of us should actually listen up. So Ant Group and others have basically completed business rectification under the guidance of financial regulators. And the announcement actually came after Ant received regulatory green light last month to expand the capital base at its consumer credit arm. Contrary to popular belief, for many of you who thinks that the entire crackdown was actually kick-started by this handsome man over here, many of you think that it was because of Jack Ma's Fury speech, that's why he got on the nerves of the Chinese regulators and that's why they started cracking down on Ant. It's actually not only Ant Group. So in here, as the report suggested, there are 14 platform enterprises. They have been ordered by the government since late 2020 to address various compliance issues, and many of them proactively cooperated with authorities. So since then, the central bank and the country's financial regulator have imposed fresh regulations to clip the wings of Ant, demanding that the Hangzhou-based company follow the same rules as a conventional bank, such as having an adequate capital base and leverage ratio. And this move was actually described by analysts as a milestone in Ant's restructuring process. So I think just to really shed some light in terms of how I read this entire situation, this entire Ant crackdown was kind of long overdue. And to be very, very honest, I was quite thankful that they stopped this entire Ant IPO. At its peak, when they wanted to IPO, Ant was at a valuation of $300 billion USD. And it was one of the biggest IPO of history. But truth be told, if you were to look into the prospectus of Ant Group, it's actually an immense business. The amount of payment processing Ant does is bigger than Visa and MasterCard combined. That was back then in 2020. And I think the amount of capital that they loan out actually rivals some of these big Chinese banks. So this was a humongous business. But this business was actually set on very shaky foundations. they were leveraged to the T. They are basically just using their proprietary algorithm to match loans to customers, and we actually don't know the level of risk that this entire arrangement is introduced to the entire financial system. And if Ant were to really IPO back in 2020, I'm sure they will be able to raise a huge ton of capital, but there will also be a huge ton of value destruction in the meantime, because we all know the entire stock market corrected, a $300 billion valuation. I'm not even sure how much is it left today, maybe 100 billion, and that's a 66% wipeout in terms of shareholder value. And think about all the international investors that are going to be burnt in the meantime because they got in at such a high valuation, and I would dare argue that it's already a speculative bubble. So the Chinese government came in, they started this entire crackdown process. They wanted to right many of these wrongs. And now, I think both Alibaba and Ant Group is in a much better position. But that being said, I think even Ant Group don't have any intentions to IPO anytime soon. So even in 2023, I don't think they're going to IPO. And I think last but not least, I just wanted to cover this interesting article that I came across. It's discussing about the idea of China just stimulating the economy like what the US did back in 2020. So the People's Bank of China says that it will avoid flooding economy with stimulus. So China will avoid unleashing massive monetary stimulus into the economy this year as it seeks to strike a balance between boosting growth, creating jobs, and maintaining price stability. I wonder who they learned this from. So we will ensure overall social demand gets powerful support. Meanwhile, the magnitude will be reasonable and appropriate, and we will avoid flooding the economy with liquidity. So he repeated that the People's Bank of China's long-standing stance that cash supply will stay reasonably sufficient. So the PBOC will guide banks to appropriately handle the strength and pace of credit supply, properly front-load support, and actively and closely coordinate with the fiscal policy and social policy. So economists actually expect GDP growth to pick up to 4.8% in 2023, after likely having growth just 3% last year. So officials have also said that the monetary stimulus this year would be at least as strong as in 2022, with policies focused on supporting domestic demand. So while inflation soared in many developed countries last year, prices have remained subdued in China, with consumer inflation rising 2% in 2022, below Beijing's target of around 3%. So in layman terms, the too long didn't read is just this. Hey, we know that China has been not very prosperous in 2022 because of a multitude of reasons. So let's not talk about what happened then. What happened moving forward in 2023 is this. We have took our lessons from our Western counterparts. They are currently trying to pay the bill for massive stimulus and monetary loosening. So we are not going to follow down that footstep. But that said, we know that demand has been lackluster, property has been crashing down, the lowering of interest rate is not propping up demand. So we will try to adopt a more targeted approach in terms of trying to stimulate the economy, but we are treading extremely carefully. We are not trying to overdo it, but rest assured that we are keeping tabs of how the economy is moving. So with that, I'll see you in the next video, but more importantly, I will finally see you on the moon. Goodbye!